So my name is Yulia Pak. I'm part of Nicole's facilitation team. We are independent facilitators, which means, once more, very important to reiterate, we do not have vested interest in the outcome of this project. You are in a sustainability room today, so welcome. We have table facilitators in the room with us today. They're all wearing name tag and a pink sticker next to them. So my team is here today to be a resource for you in terms of a process. Our job is to make sure that everyone who wants to participate and share their feedback with us today has a chance to do so in a reasonable way, and that we take all the notes and document what we're hearing saying. Make sense? Okay. So we will have table discussions for about 25 minutes after we hear a 10-minute presentation from Waterfront Toronto to help us inform the discussion today. You should have gotten on your way in at least two things. One is the agenda for today with a worksheet at the back, well, attached to it as a separate piece sheet of paper, as well as a 16-page discussion guide with 4 attachments. So the topic that we are discussing today, if you don't have it, please put your hand up and someone from my team will make sure to get a few of those. Okay. Victoria, can I ask you to bring, I think, approximately 10 of the agendas and the discussion guides here? They're at the sign-in table. Thank you. So once Victoria is back, please keep your hands up. She'll make sure that you get both of the documents today. So, the worksheets. If you feel like you don't have an opportunity to share all of your thoughts with us, that's no problem. Write them down. We'll collect the worksheets at the end of this session, or day, much rather, because you have a second session, and we'll integrate them into the report. You also have an opportunity to participate online and submit additional feedback by the end of the March if you would like your comments to make it to the final summary. That will be distributed with you in draft for your review before we finalize it. That's our standard process. The discussion that we are having today, you can find all the information that you need in attachment 1. So it's marked by the green color. So all the information that you will need today will be presented to you by Aaron, but you will also find it in a discussion guide. So, any questions about the format today and the content that we need to inform the discussion? No? Okay, good. Aaron, I think before we start, can you guys quickly introduce yourselves? So these are technical people from Waterfront Toronto that will be able to answer all of your questions during the small table discussions. They'll be floating around, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand up. But please do it during the discussion portion, because we want to make sure we get through the presentation. So if you do have a question during the presentation, just jot it down, and then we'll get to you once we've broken into discussions, okay? Okay, maybe quickly introduce yourselves and tell us what you do.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, and thanks so much for being here on what is a beautiful sunny day. My name's Aaron Barter. I'm the Director of Innovation and Sustainability at Waterfront Toronto, and I'm here with my colleagues.
I am Caroline Kim, and I am the Urban Design Project Manager for Quayside, and we also have Vinaya Mani here, who is also working with us, and you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Vinaya. I'm a project coordinator at Waterfront Toronto. I work on the buildings part of the project.
Great, so we're going to take only about 10 minutes. We'll try to move through it pretty quickly, and we're going to speak to sustainability, resilience, and climate positive. And as just a little bit of context, we're going to cover a number of topics, and there will be some combination of the three of us that can address all of your questions associated with the technical side of this topic. So with that, let's dive into it. I want to start by building on what was presented in the plenary about the key urban challenge that we're aiming to face within sustainability. So we know that cities are continuing to grow globally, and we know that with that comes the growth in greenhouse gas emissions, which is unsustainable. We have in Toronto and across Canada an 80% reduction by 2050 in emissions, and we know that we're not going to be able to get there unless we can effectively decouple the growth of population in cities from greenhouse gas emissions. So we are aiming to mitigate that impact of climate. We're also looking to adapt, and so we want to enhance the resiliency of the buildings, the infrastructure, and the neighborhoods in Toronto, such that they can survive and thrive in the face of climate change. So those are our kind of two overarching urban challenges. More specifically, we hope to build neighborhoods along the waterfront that are climate positive. And climate positive refers to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and that's taking into account all of the emissions associated with transportation and cars, as well as buildings and the waste that we generate. So that's really important, and we're going to come back to that throughout the rest of the presentation. A quick summary of what we've heard to date. As you know, this is not our first public meeting. We've got a number of documents posted on the website that capture this in much more detail, but we've heard some items that the public is supportive of, and we've heard some topics that we think the public has indicated that there needs to be further consideration, or there could be some concerns. So I'll go through these briefly, and there's, again, much more detail on all of these on our website, quaysideto.ca. In particular, so there was strong support for innovation within heating and cooling, using lake water for cooling, understanding the trade-offs between geothermal, which could add expenses, and the use of heat pump technology, which is all electric, and big questions there. Building automation, there was support for using enhanced automation systems to get to our energy and sustainability goals, but in a way that respects the privacy of citizens and makes it accessible for everyone. There was support for public sector investment and subsidy towards sustainability solutions from Waterfront Toronto or others. And there was strong support for tools that can better manage solid waste within cities, and we'll speak to some of those in more detail. Caroline, maybe you can speak to the consideration.
For considerations, there was a request to ask us to consider mass timber construction. There's questions about potential amendments in the Ontario Building Code in order to provide tall timber buildings, with questions about fire safety in the mass timber. Sustainability of mass timber construction, questions about the sustainability of mass timber construction, and generally felt that more clarity was needed on the metrics and where the lumber is sourced. And on local food production, agriculture, and community gardens should be a part of the plans, and suggested the latter could be on rooftops.
So, and of course, all of that is underpinned by the digital commitments, and this has been an overarching topic throughout this. And so Waterfront Toronto will require that if the project were to move forward, all solutions deployed would be compliant with not only all current and future laws, as well as our internal digital principles and intelligent community guidelines. And these would be enforced through contract for any proponent. This would apply to others as well as a proponent like Sidewalk Labs, similar to how we enforce green building standards in our existing buildings. So there are existing mechanisms for that, and we would ensure that all solutions would comply. When we get into a snapshot of how our evaluation of the MIDP looked within sustainability, there were 56 solutions put forward in the master plan from Sidewalk Labs. And of those, our evaluation team and our committee felt that there were 49 that were well aligned with our goals and that we would be supportive of. Within that, there is a subset of solutions that would be applicable to governments and very well aligned with existing public policy. And therefore, we think that there is an opportunity to both embrace renewed regulation to move those solutions forward, as well as potentially advocating for government funding. There were also 3 solutions, and we're going to speak more about this in a few minutes, that Waterfront Toronto considered investing in directly. And of course, there were 7 solutions that we did not support and that we did not feel were appropriate for the Quayside project, and we're going to get into those as well in a bit more detail. I also want to emphasize that there were exactly half, 28 of the 56 solutions, are what we consider to be digitally enabled. And what we mean by that is that although there are some topics that we know we're going to cover that have already been deployed in other parts of the city or globally, there is an additional digital element to those. And we just wanted to call that out as something that is potentially new and that deserves additional attention. So you can see that we've called that out, and all of those solutions we would be subject to current and future laws as well as our guidelines. Now, important to emphasize that Although this is where we've ended up today, this conclusion does not mean that we've approved moving ahead with the project or a partnership with Sidewalk Labs. It means that we see merit in including these solutions in the draft innovation plan. We're looking for your input, and the feedback from this round of public consultation will inform negotiations and discussions with Sidewalk Labs about what a plan might look like. Support for certain solutions may also change based on the discussions that we have today and the feedback that you give us, as well as discussions with Sidewalk, discussions with governments, public policy priorities as they evolve, and ultimately support from our shareholders at the governments of City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Government of Canada. So, to get into a little bit more detail on some of the solutions, I'm going to speak to several, and then I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn to get into the timber construction items in more detail. Passivhaus inspired buildings were part of the MIDP, the proposal from Sidewalk Labs, and this is something that we thought there is enough merit that it is something we'd like to do on the waterfront, and it also may be something that we would like to put money into. The reasons for this is that we know that nearly half of Toronto's emissions are from buildings. And the use of natural gas for heating buildings on cold days like today represents a huge environmental impact. And by moving towards a very well-insulated building envelope, like Passivhaus construction, we know that we can reduce that use of natural gas significantly. And this is a key solution for putting Quayside and neighborhoods like Quayside on a path towards net zero carbon, or what we call climate positive. We also know that there are important co-benefits associated with building better buildings, including better comfort for residents and lower energy costs. We think that part of the important considerations here is that this has been done in other much more temperate climates. And so demonstrating what's possible here in Toronto on the waterfront in a windy, cold climate is something that we have a unique opportunity to embrace through this project. Look forward to discussing that more with all of you around the tables. Secondly, pneumatic waste collection. So this is another solution that was put forward by Sidewalk Labs in the Master Innovation and Development Plan. And this is something that we saw merit in doing on the waterfront, and also something that we would consider placing money and investments into directly. This is actually, interestingly, something that we've explored in the past at Waterfront Toronto and haven't been able to advance it. So this is basically underground vacuum tubes that will whisk away waste, recycling, organic material from all of the buildings into the parks and public spaces. This would reduce the amount of waste that gets sent to landfill, and importantly, it would keep trucks and bins off the street, which has both an aesthetic benefit, but also much more importantly, a safety benefit. Fewer garbage trucks driving around the streets, safer for pedestrians, safer for cyclists. We also know that this is a proven infrastructure solution. In cities like Stockholm and in Barcelona, this has been in place for 20, 30 years, but we've seen very little uptake in Canada. And so this is something where we think there's an opportunity with our unique project on the waterfront to advance something new and test it out and see if it could be replicated elsewhere in the city. So I will pass it over to Carolyn.
Sorry. I have a quiet voice, so I'm adjusting. So for mass timber construction, Waterfront Toronto would like to support and advocate for government funding for buildings innovation focused on mass timber construction. The Sidewalk Labs innovation for construction is based on a model which combines factory-based production and assembly of building parts and using a sustainable, locally sourced material, which is timber, and this aligns with our goals for high-performance buildings. Mass timber is a replenishable and sustainable building material that will have significant impact to reducing embodied carbons. And just if you do not know what embodied carbons is, it is carbon dioxide, which is emitted during the production of the material. And we believe that this has a positive impact in achieving high-performance buildings. The factory-based off-site construction of predefined building components can reduce construction waste and transportation-related emissions. This approach to building construction has been done in mass timber buildings to date. And for digital electricity and mist-based sprinkler systems. This is a solution that we support and advocate for policy and regulatory reform. Buildings at Quayside are also designed to be all electric using low voltage digital electricity. Using digital electricity means that low voltage power can travel over smaller cables and along baseboards in comparison to typical conduits that have been hidden behind walls. The system will reduce the risk of fires and also allow faster renovation times. In addition to digital electricity, mist-based sprinklers are also part of the innovation, as they use 1/10 of the water consumption in comparison to a typical sprinkler and allows faster and easier renovation. And then Aaron will speak to sewage waste heat recovery.
Thanks, Caroline. So this is an example of a solution that through our technical evaluation and our work with subject matter experts, we determined would not be appropriate for the Quayside project. So just to elaborate on that more. In the Master Innovation and Development Plan, there was a proposal to connect to the Ashbridges Bay wastewater treatment plant, which we know is a massive source of low-carbon waste heat that naturally comes from across the city. And this could offset the use of natural gas in buildings. So aligned with what we're trying to achieve. However, very much not appropriate for the Quayside project due to not only the distance to the facility, we're actually situated well because we can look out the window, we can see out to that facility, and it's not anywhere close by. We also think that it's technically very challenging, and we don't think it's needed for the project. However, that being said, there are other options for capturing waste heat in other ways from closer to the project site, and we would certainly entertain those ideas. So that could include nearby sewage pumping stations or other mechanisms. So there are other solutions that we chose not to support, and there are many that we also chose to support, and they're all summarized in your discussion guide within the sustainability section. And so with that, I'm going to close and pass it back to our facilitator, Yulia, who's going to walk through some questions.
Thank you, guys. We will do a report back. Please use the microphone. It will travel from table to table to hear some of the key questions, just so that people online can hear us as well. I propose that facilitators at your table do that, but if you really want to add or say something else, there's no problem. I will start just to set an example. We didn't have a very big table, but we had very good discussion. So guys, and I will look at you, if you need to correct me, please do so. I think as a table we feel, yes, absolutely, the proposed solutions do raise the bar. Given the rate of climate change, we need to move forward. We need to stop fearing the technology, and we just need to get on with it. We specifically discussed heated pavers and a broader application, perhaps, a broader consideration of heated pavers for the project. We also discussed the importance of scalability, and they need to understand more a little bit about that. Anything else you would like to add? Okay, great, thank you. So, very quickly, Ilda, top 3.
Hi. What came through was that our table, yes, most agreed that it did raise the bar. Timber construction, for example, but more information is needed in regards to more the opportunities as well as the challenges. And also a question was raised, how does timber and passive housing go together? And again, more information was required, or hopefully more information needs to be conveyed. Question number 2 is the risks and controls. It's still a work in progress that we believed. And one good example is the human rights assessment is a good example of the control, because you're taking care of the vulnerable populations, which is an important element. But again, more information perhaps. And also we believe that Waterfront had a good track record, so it's a good system for monitoring those controls. And third is that the environmental solutions or sustainability need to be leveraged on a larger scale outside of Quayside, or whatever is leveraged here, that it needs to be applicable to a larger scale, those properties outside. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Top 3?
Hello, I'm Valerie. So our table, and feel free to jump in if you think I missed anything, we really talked about what are the specifics that are not mentioned in the guide. such as greenhouse gas savings, specifics in finances, what third-party suppliers are going to be used. There was a discussion on the wording about what really is an innovation, what's current best practice, and what is truly new. And there was also discussion about whether Sidewalk Labs, Alphabet should be the company, or should there be companies with better track records or who have experience in the field. And we also looked at, not just to look at the emissions that will be saved at the site, but look at the whole chain supply from start to finish.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anu, and at our table, everybody was largely supportive of the ways that the propositions made to meet urban challenges in terms of sustainability, and they just wanted to know how feasible these propositions really are, so they wanted more understanding about that and the next steps to execute them. They also wanted to know, there was like an openness to different types of financing being available, and they wanted to have more access to the scientific information that underpins these propositions, as well understanding how relevant these propositions would be to the city at large in terms of scalability. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Scalability seems to be a key question for everyone at this point.
Hi, I'm Victoria, and at our table there was a lot of curiosity about the innovations proposed, looking at what is the cost benefit of the innovations proposed. So they sound good, but are they in the budget? Do they make sense as a cost benefit? What's being pushed out? You talked about the mist sprinkler system. Is it safe? Is it actually more efficient enough to push out possibly another proposal that could use that money? There was discussion around food production, that wasn't a big conversation in sustainability. Where can food be grown? Is vertical farming a possibility? How are people going to access groceries at an affordable rate? How will food be transported? Will farmers be involved? Around mass timber, the question was around who benefits? What kind of labor are you using? Is it local labor? And to make sure that when you're talking about these innovations, be really clear about the benefits and how they compare to the existing infrastructure and methodologies that you could otherwise use. And transportation and logistics. This is going to be a possibly porous neighborhood. People are going to be moving in and out. How's it actually going to work?
Great, thank you. And the question of what's actually new has also come up at our table as well.
Hi, my name is Christina. At my table, I have the pleasure to share with a lot of industry professionals. I have people from the Carpenters Union, suppliers, and also graphic designer. We had two concerns, and we also have recommendations for these concerns. So our first concern was that how do we make sure the people who are installing the project do not go off the specs, so that they're using proper speculations, and that is in the way that's meant to be used. And our recommendation is that suppliers and carpenters and industry professionals be involved the whole time. So from the start to the end of the project, that would involve active collaboration by Waterfront Toronto or other people who are implementing the project the whole way. And this could be done, for example, through a committee. And again, the emphasis is from the beginning to the end involving professionals who are suppliers and carpenter. Our second concern was that there seems to be fear and doubt about mass timber and everything that is sustainable, that has to do with sustainable building. However, wood is one of the greatest sustainable resources of our country, so we should really be making use of that. And there's a lot of data that exists in Japan, Australia, the Netherlands, as well as in our own BC, that has buildings over 100 years old that's made of mass timber. If we're looking at Moses Engineering, who built AGO, they have also used mass timber. So Waterfront Toronto should be doing a better job of raising public awareness and education and just getting past this issue of fear and doubt. So awareness is key over here.
Great, very good, thank you. Yes, Nate.
Hi, so I'm going to address two main points that we discussed. The first, like many other groups, is replicability. So we were pretty excited about a lot of the things in the proposal, but we're concerned that this would sort of be a very small, isolated project and that those solutions wouldn't get out into the broader city. So for example, if we have heated bikeways, is it only 2 blocks long? or does it extend? And how do we make these solutions something that further future developments can pick up and use and start running with right away? Another concern was flooding and how flood controls are going to be a part of this project, especially with it being on the lake. Some of these diagrams that we saw on the slides show a lot of underground infrastructure, underground facilities. Are they protected from flooding?
Great, thank you. Randy.
Hello. So, our group, first we're concerned about integration with city services, so existing roads and park maintenance, like how does this new development relate with those services? And then also with the timber factory, how, if it's not going to be government run, how are we going to then regulate it using sort of government regulations? Like, is there going to be heavy reliance on government to make sure? Sorry, I'm kind of reading that one wrong, so I'm going to pass over that one. I have it in the notes. So for something else we talked about is energy solutions. So we talked about like low cost solutions being more feasible than the more attractive solutions that may be presentable in the presentation like we just saw. And geothermal is something that came up in our conversation. And then like how do we treat waste rather than just something that you collect, but something we can reuse as energy? And we talked about the ways we can do that, like the vacuum thing that got scrapped. That was something we talked about. And then also, lastly, there was a focus a lot on like recycling waste for energy. So we really wanted to figure out ways of not, rather than just collect it and then have the city deal with it, but how do we deal with it on the actual site to reuse it as potential energy for the site?
Okay, great, thanks. Do you guys want to add anything to that? All that's good? Okay, I'm just peeking outside to see how the rest of the groups are doing. I think we have 5 more minutes. So do you guys have any questions that Aaron, Caroline, and yeah, can answer right now. Sorry, I'm just gonna give you the mic.
Sorry, just a quick question on the timber factory. Are there any numbers on? I understand that's a significantly automated facility. How many people versus robots are going to be compared to the existing suppliers for that kind of product?
Right. How much of it is going to be automated? And could you use the mic over there? I think the mic is working, right? Yeah. To answer. Thank you.
That information has not been provided yet by Sidewalk Labs.
And if you have a point of advice on that, like if you prefer to see more human labor force?
It's just another kind of opportunity for us to pause and see the range of possible vendors and models to supply these innovations, which are, I see their roots as being in kind of the advice Toronto communities have given to Waterfront Toronto, not a Silicon Valley vision. This is kind of our one last moment, I think, to explore some of those models and questions.
Yes, well, also with the City of Toronto public consultation process, if it goes forward, right? Councillor Fletcher. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. My question is around how Waterfront Toronto plans to sort of capture the metrics and the data around the Passivhaus and, how many GHG emissions would be created if we built it the good old-fashioned way where all buildings are being built versus what's being proposed. What's the long-term affordability savings if we build Passivhaus versus if we build the other way? I think these numbers and these stories will be very important to understand, and so I'm curious sort of what's the approach and how can the public be better informed on this?
Yeah, a great question around metrics. So fortunately, we have precedent in this case where Waterfront Toronto has existing contracts with developers, and we enforce and collect information on how well they've performed. And but to kind of, I think what your question is also around how do we potentially analyze those trade-offs, or not trade-offs, but the comparison. And from our current understanding, Passivhaus would represent about 90% energy consumption reduction versus baseline. We know that if we were to build to net zero carbon, that would represent a massive step change in the carbon footprint of new neighborhoods in Toronto. I will also say that the Toronto Green Standard is continuing to advance, which is the city standard, and so we want to make sure that we're offering a higher bar than what's required by code across the rest of the city. And a big part of that is we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for developers and constructors and others in the industry to try out some of those new solutions like Passivhaus construction that have not been deployed at scale in Toronto, and then to the point that was raised earlier, then replicate those whatever works, and if we learn that something is more challenging and more expensive, then we can take a different direction. So I think this test bed environment is very important to kind of explore some of those aspects that work. On metrics as well, I think that because we're able to enforce these through contract, we ensure that we have certifications that are coming through. To date, that's been LEED certification, but we want to make sure that we continue to have contractual mechanisms to hold developers accountable, and the same would be true for this process.
And I think the same questions have arose at this table when we were reporting back on what is not included in a section right now currently, and also one of the tables talked about the need to raise awareness about passive housing and timber construction. So thanks for this. I have 2 more questions.
Maybe not so simple, but this is my first public consultation, so I've been thoroughly, and my first plenary, I've never used that word as many times as I have today. I was very impressed by the diversity of the topics that came up at each table, and one of the things that stuck with me, and you just answered this question specifically around the numerics, is talking about a percentage improvement over what it is currently. A lot of the other tables talked about things that aren't in the proposal or aren't mentioned, and yet I think, how do we ensure that Waterfront Toronto doesn't just look at what's not in the proposal, but recognizes that the opportunity cost of sticking with the status quo. I used to work in the building which is currently Sidewalk Labs' building in Quayside. I left there in 2003. If I looked out my office window in that building in 2003, and I looked out that building right now, nothing has changed. East and west, it's been super improved, but in that area, nothing has changed. So it's maybe more of a philosophical question, but how do we ensure that Waterfront Toronto actually looks not only at what's missing or what isn't in the deck, but actually how much improvement there is over the status quo and the glacial pace of improvement in that area?
And maybe this is one way to raise awareness about all the good things that are coming. Just use metrics and statistics where you can. I have a gentleman over here.
Hi there. So I'd like to know if you have an idea of how much all these innovations would cost, like extra cost for the unit price, for the price of the unit, apartment or retail area, because it's like all the waste, vacuum system of the sprinkler or digital, or even the paving is much more expensive, everything. So I'd like to know how much it would be affect the pricing of the units, and also technical questions regarding the mass timber exposed to outside. What technology is that and how much it would impact in maintenance for the timber exposed. And I heard from Sidewalk's presentation that they are proposing substitute the drywall for partition from Japan. So how it's gonna be addressed, as drywall is a gigantic industry, right? So how can we substitute that?
Great.
Okay, thank you.
So I heard 3 questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tackle the first one, and then I'm going to let Carolyn tackle the second 2. Around costs, your question was, what is the premium? And I would say we don't know the premium because we're still figuring out what, in conversations like today, what might go into the project. And so we want to reflect all of that feedback. We acknowledge, however, that there will be a premium. And this is also consistent with our precedent at Waterfront Toronto. We've asked for things like LEED certification for all buildings and higher levels of affordable housing and higher quality standards in the public realm since all of our work for the last 15 years. And we know that results or could result in higher cost. So it's certainly part of our calculus, and we want to understand what those premiums might be, but also acknowledging that it is part of our work to put that money back into into those types of initiatives. So I hope that answers your first question. And the second question was around exposure of timber, and then around shikui plaster.
So with the exposure of timber, I don't think that's correct. They are looking at an exterior cladding system, just because you cannot expose timber in Ontario Building Code in Ontario. With shikui plaster, it's still a study. The idea is to apply the shikui plaster in the factory, which has many benefits in terms of being messy and waste in particular, and you just get what you need. What that means in terms of bringing that industry over to Canada and using it here, I'm not sure yet, and I'm pretty sure that Sidewalk Labs is exploring that, but has not shared that information yet as to date.
But the question of scalability, both in terms of testing the solution, but also thinking about how to implement and how to change from what we see today, has come up over and over and over again. And to your point, this is something that we need to be thinking about.